Zulia jekundu la VOA. Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, October 22nd. This is Africa 54.
Thousands rally across Sudan to protest military rule. Mixed-race children taken from mothers in the Belgian Congo sue for crimes against humanity. And one of the world's last two northern white rhinos retires from the breeding program.
We begin in the Horn of Africa, where Ethiopia conducted an airstrike on the capital of the northern Tigray region, Mekelle, on Friday for the fourth day this week, as fighting has intensified between central government and regional forces. Residents in a city in the neighboring Amhara region said people there were fleeing due to the intensity of the fighting. Humanitarian sources and the Tigray People's Liberation Front said the airstrike hit a university in the regional capital. Government spokesman Legesse Tulu said it had struck a former military base now occupied by TPLF fighters. He denied the university was hit. Reuters news agency was not able to confirm either account independently. Tigray TV, controlled by the TPLF, reported that 11 civilians were wounded in the strike. Humanitarian sources said a UN plane was forced to abort a scheduled landing in Mekelle due to the airstrike. In Sudan, hundreds of thousands are estimated to have taken to the streets in the capital, Khartoum, and across the country on Thursday. They are protesting against the prospect of a return to military rule. David Doyle has more.
Huge crowds marched on Thursday against the prospect of military rule in Sudan, in what was estimated to be the biggest demonstration since longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir was overthrown 2 years ago.
Yes to a civil state and yes to a democratic transition, and no to army rule.
Sudan is being ruled in a brittle military-civilian partnership, but relations between the two sides have soured. A coalition of rebel groups and political parties has aligned itself with the military and accuses civilian parties of mismanagement and monopolizing power. It's been behind protests since Saturday, calling on the army to dissolve Sudan's cabinet. Civilian leaders say that would amount to a coup. Thursday's counter-protest took place on the anniversary of the 1964 October Revolution, in which a military government was overthrown. Reuters journalists estimated the number of participants to be in the hundreds of thousands. Demonstrator Abdul Mutaliba Tiatala said the choice of the nation when it ousted Bashir was a full civil state. He said the army had thought the spirit of the revolution was gone, but that belief was an illusion. Plumes of smoke could be seen across Khartoum as protesters burned tyres and waved Sudanese flags. The military says it is committed to the transition to democracy and elections at the end of 2023. Sudan's civilian Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who remains popular despite painful reforms aimed at tackling an economic crisis, says he is speaking to all sides to find a solution. In a statement on Thursday evening, he saluted protesters, saying their voices had been heard and that there's no going back from the goals of the revolution.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. Hundreds of school children stormed the Democratic Republic of Congo's parliament on Thursday amid a strike by school teachers. The Congo Teachers Union said the teachers went on strike at the start of the school year on October 4th over several issues, including salaries, bonus pay, and retirement age. On Thursday, hundreds of students in their uniforms stormed the National Assembly, waving branches and chanting, quote, "We want to study." The Vice President of Parliament, Jean-Marc Kabund, told them they should either be in school or at home, but not on the streets protesting. Kabund urged the striking teachers to present their demands to the authorities rather than use students. A group of mixed-race women who were abducted as children by state officials in what was then Belgian Congo is suing the Belgian state for crimes against humanity. As Henry Ridgwell reports, the case comes as Belgium struggles to reconcile its brutal colonial past.
Leah Tavares Mujinga was born in the Belgian Congo, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, to a white Belgian father and a black Congolese mother. When she was 2 years old, while her father was away, Belgian colonial officials snatched her from her home. Speaking last year, Mujinga described what happened.
They took me away from my mother, who was with me at that time, from my parents' home, to put me in a religious institution in Katende, the Catholic mission of Katende, with the Sisters of Saint Vincent de Paul, as they did with other children before me. And my elder brother was also kidnapped a year before me.
The state's actions were motivated by race.
If a white man or a white woman marries a black man or a black woman, it was seen as a sin. So the child is considered as a child of prostitution. So that's what we were called, children of sin.
Mujinga said she suffered from malnutrition and still bears the physical and mental scars. Thousands of children were taken away from their African mothers by Belgian authorities. After Congo gained independence in 1960, lawyers say they were abandoned. Mujinga is one of 5 women, now all in their 70s, who suffered that fate as children and are now suing the Belgian government. They are seeking compensation of $55,000 each, a relatively small amount because if they lose, the women will have to pay a percentage of that sum to the state. The case has much wider implications, says their lawyer, Michel Hirsch.
Those of mixed race were seen as a threat to the colony, a threat to the colonial system, and also a threat to the supremacy of the white race. And what Belgium, the Belgian state, put in place during colonization was a system to eliminate children.
Lawyers say the Belgian state wanted to prevent interracial unions and make sure the so-called Métis children would not claim a link with Belgium in later life. Belgium officially apologized in 2019 for its role in abducting mixed-race children in its African colonies. But Hirsch says it doesn't go far enough.
The system that was put in place by the Belgian state can be qualified as a crime against humanity, because it was a systemic attack against a civilian population, children of mixed race, that is to say, for racial reasons. The Belgian state admitted the facts, but never compensated in any way. And today, in court, the Belgian state still refuses to compensate.
The civil court in Brussels is expected to deliver a verdict within 6 weeks. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Kenya lifted a nationwide curfew this week. It has been in place since March 2020 to curb the spread of the coronavirus. The announcement was made by President Uhuru Kenyatta. During the course of the pandemic, Kenyan police have been accused of community human rights groups of brutality and killings while enforcing the curfew. In an interview with A54 managing editor Vincent Makori, Irungu Houghton, the executive director of Amnesty International Kenya, says COVID was expected to have adverse effects on the citizens, but no one expected police high-handedness.
What we weren't prepared for, I think, in some ways, was the level of violence in terms of enforcing the curfew. Amnesty International Kenya has, with a number of organizations, been monitoring and acting on several cases. And in many cases, what we found is that a misdemeanor like not wearing a mask or not staying home during curfew was enough to have several people, assaulted, beaten, and in some cases shot. In the streets of some of the urban settlements across Nairobi, Mombasa, and other places. So I think there's been real concern to the degree of violence that we've seen. But it's not just state violence; it's also civil violence or citizens' violence. We've seen 40% increases in sexual and gender-based violence from intimate partners as well. Mental health is really being tested at this time, and I think for many of us, we are essentially seeing the universal vaccination program as being probably the most important game changer, not just in terms of protecting the right to health, but also in opening up the economy, and lastly, in ensuring that we don't go into an election season with COVID-19 public health guidelines that would allow for, weaponization of different parts of the government against the opposition. So I think these are some of the concerns around this area. And I think one of the reasons I'm in Washington at the moment is really to raise the flag, the red flag, at the negative consequences of global vaccine apartheid. The idea that in some parts of the world, people have had 2 jabs, they're looking at their 3rd booster, and in many parts of Africa, people are really yet to get the 1st jab. I think Kenya at the moment only has 4% immunity, for countries like the US with up to 50%, 70% in some states, this is just really shocking and needs to be called out. And I think the first thing we have to do is demand that the richer countries lift the waiver, lift the restrictions on intellectual property rights for the production of generic vaccines, so that countries like Kenya, like South Africa, that have the capacity to domestically manufacture can do so.
That would be great. And just finally on that issue, would it be considered a human rights issue? Those politicians, those officials who have been accused of actually enriching themselves from COVID-19 funds, they have been stealing, they have been misappropriating funds, whether it is at the central government level or even county government level.
No, it is. It's a human rights violation. It's also an affront to the chapter in our constitution, which is the leadership and integrity chapter, that forbids public servants or state officers from enriching themselves using public resources. So it's very clearly a case. And sadly, pandemic profiteering and what we call in Kenya coronapreneurs, people who made large amounts of money essentially from inflating the costs of protective personal equipment, but also the vaccines, I think, and the equipment around the vaccination program. That many of those people, essentially were not only just endangering the population, but they were essentially holding up the vaccination effort. And I think we have kept a very strong line that government must prosecute people involved in providing inflated goods and services, because ultimately they are profiting from a pandemic.
That was A54 Managing Editor Vincent Makori speaking with Irongo Houghton, Executive Director of Amnesty International, Kenya. The world's last male northern white rhinoceros, a 45-year-old named Sudan, died in 2018 in Kenya. It left the only 2 surviving female members of the species, Najin and Fatu. The 2 remain the only hope for the survival of their species, and for that, they have been kept busy. Now scientists are making a critical decision about their future. Clara Frank has more.
One of the world's last 2 northern white rhinos, a mother and her daughter, retired on Thursday from a breeding program aimed at saving the species from extinction. 32-year-old Najin is the mother of Fatu, who is now the only donor left in the program. There are no known living males, and neither of the 2 remaining females can carry a calf to term. Scientists hope to implant artificially developed embryos made from the rhino's egg cells and frozen sperm from deceased males into surrogate mothers. The biorescue team, led by researchers from the Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research in Germany, has been racing against time to save the world's most endangered mammal. They said in a statement that Najin was retired from the program, citing ethical concerns, and that her advanced age and signs of illness were also taken into account. Northern white rhinos, which are actually gray, used to roam freely in several countries in East and Central Africa, but their numbers fell sharply due to widespread poaching for their horns. The team hopes to be able to deliver its first northern white rhino calf in 3 years and a wider population in the next 2 decades. Clara Frank, VOA News.
Somalia's president and prime minister resolved a dispute over appointments to security bodies, allowing a stalled process to elect a new parliament and president to go ahead, according to the government spokesman. Somalia was meant to choose a new president this month, culminating in a complicated indirect election process that would also select a parliament. That, however, was halted during a dispute between President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed and Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble over who would head the National Intelligence Service Agency. Somalia has had only limited central rule since a dictator was toppled 30 years ago and has never conducted a free election. Still to come, a Friday treat by Zimbabwe's musical group Makoomba. Stay with us. Welcome back. American activist Tarana Burke first coined the phrase Me Too in 2006 to help black women share their stories of sexual trauma. Back then, Burke had doubts whether Me Too would catch on, but it did. VOA's Heidi Adams takes a closer look at the movement and how it has helped survivors of sexual harassment and abuse hold some of America's most powerful men to account.
In 2017, the MeToo hashtag turned into a global phenomenon, a rallying cry against sexual abuse and assault for women across the Americas, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. It also brought global attention to other versions of the worldwide social movement as protesters called for perpetrators to be brought to justice. The potency of the movement was perhaps best seen with high-profile trials in Hollywood as dozens of survivors stepped forward to reveal years of sexual abuse by some of the industry's most powerful men. Movie mogul Harvey Weinstein was convicted for rape and sexual assault. He is now serving a 23-year prison sentence. In 2018, comedian and actor Bill Cosby was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. However, he was freed in June after his conviction was vacated by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania for violations of Cosby's Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment due process rights. As Cosby walked out of prison, another entertainment icon faced multiple allegations of sexual abuse spanning decades.
Robert said, "Don't believe everything you hear."
R. Kelly has been charged with multiple counts of sexual assault.
In an explosive documentary, sexual assault survivors recounted how R&B superstar R. Kelly preyed on teenaged girls.
Black women had been talking about this story since 1991.
America has not held abusers accountable.
This is us, America. This is us letting this happen.
I know the names of 48 women whose lives Kelly has ruined. 48 women can't be lying.
Yo, killing me with this!
In September, Kelly was convicted of sex trafficking and racketeering. He's awaiting sentencing and faces separate charges of sex abuse and child pornography. Tarana Burke says Kelly's conviction was a long time coming and offers survivors hope.
I think that there is some relief that they're raising their voices mattered, right? Because I think for a lot of people who have come forward, both in this case and outside of this case, only to have it fall on deaf ears or not be believed or not see a conviction, right? Which is why we try to encourage people not to put their eggs in the basket of a conviction, like not to seek healing from the outcome of a court case, because it's just, you just can't control it.
Burke has penned a highly personal memoir of her childhood in New York City, her journey into activism, and the beginnings of Me Too. The book contains a heart-wrenching account of how a man raped her at the age of 7 and how that profoundly shaped her future.
Shame it's all-consuming, right? It can get into all the nooks and crannies and cracks and crevices of your life. And if there's not something that's put in place to expose it, right, for what it is, which is a lie. And I didn't have that. And a lot of people, young, old, black, white, a lot of people just don't have that. There's not enough messages that say this is not your shame to carry.
Before the Me Too era and social media, American lawyer Anita Hill blazed a momentous trail for women. In 1991, she publicly accused Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment in televised testimony before an all-male Senate Judiciary Committee. Hill says she saw history repeat itself in 2018 when academic Christine Blasey Ford accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault. But just like Thomas decades before him, Kavanaugh secured a lifelong appointment to America's highest court.
I wish that I had known that the work would take a long time and that I should be patient. I should be diligent, but patient. That's what I wish I had known. I actually thought that it could be done, relatively quickly, because if we had the right processes in place, as a lawyer, we think that's all there is to it. But what I wasn't understanding was that our culture of denial of the harm that gender violence is causing has been built into those systems.
Hill released a book recently titled Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. She says the COVID-19 lockdowns presented an opportunity to recount her experiences and those of other survivors of sexual abuse.
There was this urgency to have a reckoning, actually, some sense of accountability for where we are with gender violence. I think that was confirmed when, in the very early days of the pandemic, intimate partner violence just surged. And so that was the confirmation, really, that this was time for the book. And people were ready to deal with hard questions.
That was Heidi Adams reporting. Voice of America has been hosting live music performances by artists around the world for decades. Today, we go back in time to enjoy one such vintage performance by an Afrofusion band from our flagship radio program, Music Time in Africa. Host Heather Maxwell presents.
Mukumba is a multi-award-winning band of boyhood friends from Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. Now, in 2016, they came to Washington, D.C. to perform for me on Music Time in Africa, and you can watch that whole thing on YouTube. But for now, let me share with you the second song that they performed. It's called Mabemba, and it comes off of their 2017 album, Luyando.
Na limenegenya wambata kamodhi na linyenyenga Mawimba ye na limenegenya wambata malonga na linyenyenga Mawimba ye Mawemba ye, nali menegenya, wambataka mothi, nali nyenjenga. Etuvanika tunatena jala Ijeni Etuvanika tunatena jala Ijeni Etuvanika tunatena jala
And that's our show for today. Have a great weekend.